Torah and Joshua, you have taught us some really very beautiful and very important Torah here this morning. And maybe most importantly, you have asked some really important questions, trying to understand about anger and contradictions in this time that we're living through feels existentially important. Cora, you asked this question, what do we do when two things are spoken, where if one of them is true, by design, the other one cannot be true, but our tradition insists that they're both true? Does this mean that the whole tradition is false or disposable? As you wisely concluded, no. And you reminded us that contradictions are possibly the opposite of that they can draw us even deeper into spiritual life, that they are opportunities to be more curious, to ask probing questions, to learn to sit with our discomfort, and to do so many other things that elevate how we experience this world instead of just leading us to frustration or disappointment. The most classic example of a contradiction in Jewish tradition is really quite telling. It's from Pirkei Avot, which is part of the Mishnah. And there it says, Hakol tzafui v'hareshut nituna. All things are known, and free will is given. This is understood to mean that God knows everything that will ever happen, and human beings make choices and control our own destinies. Of course, if God already knows what the future is, how is anything we do really a genuine choice? Yet here is this text in our Jewish tradition anyway, a seemingly unsolvable contradiction. But if we view it through the lens that you've taught us today, it actually makes me wonder if this text is purposely intended for us as a reminder that Jewish tradition is not meant to provide us with simple answers, and that the most important things that we encounter in life are rarely as black and white as we'd like them to be. Perhaps the purpose of contradiction in faith, then, is to draw us into the gray areas where our best and highest selves might emerge. But let's put a pin in that for a moment and come back to it. And let's talk about anger for a bit. Joshua, you raised this powerful question about God's anger and whether it's right or fair that God reacts with so much heat for the misbehaved actions of the Israelites. After all the good that they have done, you questioned how quickly God loses God's temper in anger. And I think this is also a very important question for our day. The Talmudic rabbis also think a lot about anger. Now, mainly they talk about human anger, but it's not a very far leap from how we might understand God anger. There's this great text in the Babylonian Talmud in Masechet Eruvin that teaches by three things a person is known: by kos'o, kis'o, and ka'aso, by his cup, by his pocket, and by his anger. His cup refers to his actions when he's drinking wine. His pocket refers to how honest he is with his finances. And his anger refers to how he conducts himself when he's angry. So first, let's note that Jewish tradition doesn't pretend that anger doesn't exist or ask us not to express it. But the rabbis do care a lot about how we express it. Do we rage with the unbridled anger of God in Parshat Haazinu? Is our temper short? Do we let it flare with fury? The rabbis understand that these choices have consequences. In fact, at the end of Parshat Haazinu, we're reminded of the consequences of acting with unbridled anger. At the end of the Torah portion, God tells Moses that he is not allowed to enter the land of Israel with the people. We've heard this before, but we get reminded of it right here. We can trace this punishment back to a moment in the book of Numbers in which the people were complaining of their thirst, and God told Moses to speak to a rock, and the water would flow forth from it for the people. But Moses got so angry. The people have been obnoxious and misbehaved and ungrateful, And so out of Moses' anger, he strikes the rock and he yells out, "Shall we get you water from this rock?" Not only did he hit the rock instead of speaking to it, but he took credit for God's miracle. Overcome by his anger, Moses let it control him. And his punishment is profound. The commentator Ibn Ezra teaches that in that moment, Moses' anger distracted him from his ultimate purpose, from who he wanted to be, and from what he most wanted to accomplish. He wanted to help his people. He wanted to be lovingly connected to God, but he let his anger rule him. There are many things today that we might be feeling a great deal of anger about. Anger for the anti-Semitic attack in Manchester on Yom Kippur. Anger for 48 Israelis still held captive almost 2 years after October 7th. Anger for the suffering of innocent civilians in Gaza, starving and terrified and dying. Anger at our administration, willing to shut down the government and then lie and say that it's the fault of undocumented immigrants who want free health care. We might feel a boiling inside of us for this and for so much more. So what do we do with that anger if expressing it ragefully might in fact distract us from our purpose, from who we want to be, from what we want to accomplish, like it did for Moses, whether that is to eradicate anti-Semitism and hate of all kinds, or to free the hostages, or to end the war, or to support our immigrant neighbors, and so much more. If an uncontrolled anger has these obvious spiritual and strategic consequences, what do we do? It might help us to note that the word anger comes from the Norse word for grief. A-N-G is the Norse word meaning the emotion of grief that we feel when we experience loss. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Consider the things that are making us angry right now. Aren't they rooted in some kind of loss? The loss of our sense of safety, the loss of an identity we were once clear about, the loss of our innocence, the loss of a country that seemed to try to reflect a certain set of values. If anger expressed as unbridled rage pushes away and destroys, could anger expressed through grief draw others near in empathy? And how do we live in this world that is rife with things that are worthy of our anger and full of contradiction without losing ourselves? I think we find the beginning of some answers at the intersection of anger and contradiction. See, the ancient rabbis left us some wisdom that ties your two teachings together in a powerful way. Over the past 10 days of awe, we have been praying a certain set of words over and over and over again. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'Chanun, Erech Apayim v'Rav Chesed v'Emet, Noter Chesed la'alafim, Nosei Avon v'Fesha, v'Chata v'Nakeh. That should sound familiar at this point. And it means Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. These are the 13 attributes of God that we recite during the High Holy Days. Why? Because they are the words that God told Moses to say when they were in the wilderness and God's anger turned towards wrath and violence. When the people needed forgiveness, God said, "Remind me of this. Remind me of my purpose and who I want to be. I am Rachum v'Chanun, compassionate and full of grace, and I am Erech Apayim, slow to anger." Remind me, Moses, that it's good for me to be slow to anger. It's who I want to be, though sometimes I forget that. But there is an amazing contradiction baked into this key to God's forgiveness. What we say on the High Holy Days is not the full text that we find in the Torah. Who knew that? Did we know this? This is a really fun Torah fact. when the rabbis put these 13 attributes into the Machzor, the High Holy Day prayer book, they truncated it. In the Torah, it says, Adonai, Adonai, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, yet not remitting punishment, but visiting the sin of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generation. The contradiction? God is forgiving and compassionate, and also God is not. When it went into the Machzor, they cut that last part entirely, which leads us to the other thing that we can do with a contradiction. We can choose. Remember, harashut nituna, human beings have free will. The heart of contradiction is what saves us from an unforgiving anger. We can choose how to express that which is most deeply felt inside of us. We can choose to not be distracted from our purpose, from who we are and want to be. The stakes are so high right now on all of it. So in addition to all of the other beautiful things that we can do with contradiction, we can choose, like the rabbis did, which part of the contradiction must be fulfilled. Is there compassion or no compassion? And we can learn from Moses and God and decide how to express our anger with a humanity that draws others in instead of pushing them away. Cora and Josh, may we take your deep and thoughtful teachings with us as we face the most confounding and the most painful challenges ahead, so that we can continue to do our very best to fulfill our purpose and who we want to be. Yasher Koach to you both. We are very proud of you.